In June 1946, Italy voted to end 1,000 years of monarchy. The decision came swift and decisive. 54% chose republic over crown. King Umberto II, who had ruled for just 33 days, gathered his belongings and departed for exile, taking with him not just the weight of a lost throne, but a young family whose future would unfold far from their homeland. 4 children, born in palaces of marble and raised among the rituals of ancient protocol, would now grow up in borrowed houses across Europe. Their names were Maria Pia, Vittorio Emanuele, Maria Gabriella, and Maria Beatrice, each destined to navigate the complexities of a world that no longer recognized their birthright. One would inherit controversy and claim a crown that no longer existed. Another would become the keeper of memories, preserving the heritage of a fallen dynasty. 2 would build quiet lives in distant lands far from the spotlight of their birth. This is the story of the exiled House of Savoy, told through the lives of Umberto II's children. Before we dive in, if stories like this are your thing, tap subscribe so you don't miss the next chapter, and drop a quick comment. Where are you watching from, and what time is it right now? I love seeing this community span cities, countries, and late nights. The referendum of June 2, 1946 changed everything. Italy, exhausted by war and disillusioned with monarchy's role in Mussolini's rise, chose to become a republic. The margin was narrow but decisive. 12.7 million votes for the republic against 10.7 million for the monarchy. Umberto II, who had only become king a month earlier when his father Victor Emanuele III abdicated, faced an impossible situation. The May King, as history would remember him, departed Italy on June 13, 1946, bound first for Portugal and later Switzerland. Behind the dignity of his exile lay a practical concern. What would become of his wife and 4 young children? Queen Marie-Josée, born a princess of Belgium, made the painful decision to take the children abroad. The eldest, Maria Pia, was 12 years old. Vittorio Emanuele, the heir apparent, was 9. Maria Gabriella was 6, and little Maria Beatrice had just turned 3. They would be educated in Switzerland, far from the country that had rejected their father's crown. The 1948 Italian Constitution formalized their exile, specifically forbidding male members of the House of Savoy from entering Italian territory. This ban would last until Chapter II, spanning 54 years. An entire lifetime for some, and the formative decades for all of Umberto's children. What followed were lives lived in the shadow of what might have been. Each child would respond to exile differently, some embracing public roles, others seeking privacy, all carrying the particular burden of a dynasty without a kingdom. Their stories reveal not just personal resilience, but the broader question of how royal families adapt when history moves beyond them. The children of Umberto II grew up knowing they were different, but learning that difference no longer carried the weight of destiny. Princess Maria, Pia Margherita Giuseppina Cristina. Cecilia Elena was born on September 24, 1934, in Naples, the first child of the future King Umberto II and Queen Marie-Josée. Her birth was celebrated across Italy. The Savoy dynasty had an heir, and the continuity of the 1,000-year-old monarchy seemed assured. Her early childhood unfolded in the rarefied atmosphere of Italian royal palaces. She learned protocol before she could properly walk, curtsied to visiting dignitaries before she could read, and spoke multiple languages as naturally as breathing. The Villa San Martino in Rome became her primary residence, where she lived surrounded by the centuries-old traditions of European royalty. But Maria Pia's sheltered world began to crack during World War II. As Italy's military fortunes declined and political instability grew, the royal family faced increasing criticism. The princess, though young, witnessed the gathering storm that would eventually sweep away her father's throne. When the monarchy fell in 1946, 12-year-old Maria Pia found herself thrust into exile. The transition from palace life to the comparative modesty of Swiss boarding schools must have been jarring. Yet she adapted with the stoicism expected of Savoy blood. Her education continued in Switzerland and later Portugal, where her father had established his primary residence. Maria Pia received the education befitting an exiled princess, comprehensive, cultured, and designed to prepare her for a life that would bridge the old world and the new. She became fluent in Italian, French, English, German, and Portuguese, skills that would serve her well in the cosmopolitan circles of European nobility. Her Catholic upbringing, emphasized by both parents, remained a cornerstone of her identity throughout her life. The Church provided not just spiritual guidance, but social connections within the network of European Catholic aristocracy, many of whom had their own complicated relationships with the changing political landscape of post-war Europe. As she reached adulthood in the early 1950s, Maria Pia embodied the particular challenges facing young European royalty. She possessed all the training and instincts of a princess, but lived in a world where such titles carried more burden than privilege. Her father's exile meant she could not return to Italy, effectively making her a woman without a country. In 1955, at age 21, Maria Pia found love and common cause with Prince Alexander of Yugoslavia, son of the exiled King Alexander I, who had been assassinated in 1934. Their union represented more than romance. It was a marriage between two royal houses displaced by the 20th century's tumultuous politics. The wedding, held in Portugal, brought together the scattered remnants of European royalty. King Umberto II walked his eldest daughter down the aisle, while representatives from various dethroned monarchies attended. The ceremony was both celebration and act of defiance, a statement that royal traditions would continue regardless of political circumstances. Prince Alexander, like his new bride, carried the weight of exile. Yugoslavia was now under Tito's communist government, making their marriage a union of the dispossessed. Yet together they found strength in shared understanding of loss, displacement, and the responsibility to preserve traditions that the modern world seemed eager to abandon. The couple established their household primarily in France, where they raised 4 children in rapid succession. First came twins Dimitri and Michael in 1958, followed by another set of twins, Serge and Helene, in 1963. Maria Pia threw herself into motherhood with characteristic intensity, determined to give her children the stability that political upheaval had denied her own generation. But the marriage faced pressures that proved insurmountable. The stress of exile, financial constraints, and the particular challenges of maintaining royal dignity while living as private citizens took their toll. In 1967, after 12 years of marriage, Maria Pia and Alexander divorced, a decision that shocked European royal circles, where divorce remained rare and scandalous. The divorce freed Maria Pia to pursue a more independent path. She remained close to her children while building a life that balanced royal obligations with personal fulfillment. Her facility with languages and deep knowledge of European culture made her a sought-after figure in cultural and charitable circles. For decades, she remained single, focusing on raising her children and supporting various philanthropic causes. She became particularly involved in efforts to preserve European royal heritage, understanding better than most how quickly centuries of tradition could disappear. In 2003, at age 69, Maria Pia surprised many by remarrying. Her second husband, Prince Michel of Bourbon-Parma, was himself a member of European nobility with deep understanding of the complexities of royal life in the modern era. Their marriage was quieter than her first, a mature union between two people who had found peace with their circumstances. In her later years, Maria Pia began speaking more openly about her experiences, giving interviews, and contributing to books about the House of Savoy. Her memoirs, while discreet, provided valuable insight into the personal cost of political exile and the challenge of maintaining dignity in circumstances beyond one's control. As the eldest child, Maria Pia held a special place in her father's affections. King Umberto II, denied the opportunity to rule, invested tremendous emotional energy in his children. He saw in Maria Pia not just his firstborn, but the embodiment of Savoy resilience and dignity. Throughout his exile, which lasted until his death in 1983, Umberto relied on Maria Pia as both companion and confidant. She understood, perhaps better than his other children, the weight of responsibility he carried and the grief he felt for a throne, lost not through personal failing, but historical circumstance. When Umberto II died in Geneva on March 18, 1983, Maria Pia was at his bedside. She took responsibility for organizing his funeral and ensuring that his remains were eventually returned to Italy when political circumstances allowed. Her dedication to preserving her father's memory became one of the defining purposes of her later life. Maria Pia understood that she represented continuity, not political continuity, for that had been severed in 1946, but cultural and personal continuity. She became the keeper of stories, the preserver of traditions, and the living link between the House of Savoy's royal past and its uncertain future. Her life demonstrated that royal identity need not depend on political power. Through dignity, service, and quiet determination, she proved that exile could not diminish the essential qualities that had sustained her family for nearly a millennium. Princess Maria Pia died on September 15, 2014, in Paris, having lived to see her family's partial rehabilitation in Italy and the gradual healing of old wounds. Prince Vittorio Emanuele Umberto Raimondo Gennaro Maria was born on February 12, 1937, in Naples, the long-awaited male heir to the House of Savoy. His birth secured the dynastic succession and was celebrated throughout Italy with the traditional grandeur reserved for future kings. From his earliest moments, he was groomed not just as a prince, but as the future sovereign of Italy. His childhood was carefully orchestrated to prepare him for the throne. Private tutors instructed him in history, languages, and statecraft. Military advisors taught him the fundamentals of strategy and leadership. Court officials drilled him in protocol and ceremony. By age 9, Vittorio Emanuele possessed knowledge and responsibilities that would have seemed extraordinary for any ordinary child. But on June 13, 1946, when the royal family departed Italy for exile, 9-year-old Vittorio Emanuele lost more than his country. He lost his entire reason for being. The heir to the throne had become the heir to nothing, carrying a title that the Italian people had explicitly rejected. The transition to exile proved particularly difficult for Vittorio Emanuele. Unlike his sisters, who could adapt their roles as they matured, his identity was inextricably linked to a political position that no longer existed. The 1948 Italian Constitution's ban on male Savoy descendants entering Italy meant he was not just exiled from a country, but from his destiny. His education continued in Switzerland, where he attended the Institut Le Rosé, often called the School of Kings for its royal clientele. Surrounded by other displaced noble children, he found some comfort in shared experience. But the question of his future loomed constantly. What does a future king become when there is no kingdom? The adolescent prince developed a complicated relationship with his exile. Part of him embraced the relative freedom of private life, freed from the crushing expectations of royal duty. But another part harbored deep resentment toward the Italian Republic and determination to reclaim what he saw as his birthright. As he reached adulthood, Vittorio Emanuele began to develop the controversial public persona that would define his later life. He spoke openly of his desire to return to Italy and his belief that the monarchy had been wrongfully abolished. These statements, while perhaps understandable given his circumstances, often struck observers as out of touch with contemporary Italian reality. Denied the career for which he had been trained, Vittorio Emanuele turned to business ventures with mixed success. He engaged in various commercial enterprises, from aviation to arms dealing, though the latter would later become a source of significant controversy. His claim to leadership of the House of Savoy brought him into conflict with other family members, particularly his cousin Prince Amadeo, Duke of Aosta, who disputed Vittorio Emanuele's headship of the family. These dynastic quarrels, played out in public, often made the Savoy family appear petty and divided at precisely the moment when unity might have strengthened their position. The most serious controversy erupted in August 1978 during a yachting holiday in Corsica. Vittorio Emanuele was involved in an incident that resulted in the death of Dirk Hamer, a 19-year-old German tourist. The prince claimed he fired a warning shot from his rifle to deter intruders, but the bullet ricocheted and killed Hamer. The incident sparked decades of legal battles. Vittorio Emanuele was initially acquitted by French courts, but the case was repeatedly reopened as new evidence emerged and witnesses came forward. The Hamer family pursued the case relentlessly, convinced that the prince had received preferential treatment because of his status. The controversy followed Vittorio Emanuele for the rest of his life, overshadowing his other activities and reinforcing perceptions that he was reckless and entitled. Even when he was finally acquitted of all charges in 2007, the damage to his reputation proved irreparable. Further controversies emerged in 2006 when Vittorio Emanuele was arrested in connection with allegations of corruption, illegal arms dealing, and exploitation of prostitution. Wiretapped conversations revealed him making inflammatory statements about various political and social issues. Though he was eventually acquitted of these charges as well, the scandal cemented his image as a problematic figure. In 1971, Vittorio Emanuele married Marina Ricolfi Doria, a member of Italian nobility. The marriage was controversial within royal circles because Marina was not of royal blood, but the couple proceeded despite family objections. Their wedding represented a break with tradition that reflected Vittorio Emanuele's complicated relationship with royal protocol. The marriage produced one son, Emanuele Filiberto, born in 1972. For Vittorio Emanuele, his son represented hope for the future of the dynasty and the possibility of eventual restoration. He invested tremendous energy in preparing Emanuele Filiberto for a role that might never exist, yet could not help but hope for changed circumstances. Marina proved to be a stabilizing influence on her husband, though she could not shield him entirely from the consequences of his controversial decisions. She maintained a lower public profile, focusing on family life and avoiding the political statements that often got Vittorio Emanuele into trouble. As Emanuele Filiberto grew to adulthood, he demonstrated a more sophisticated understanding of public relations and political reality than his father. Through television appearances, cultural initiatives, and carefully managed media presence, the younger prince began to rehabilitate the Savoy image in Italy, achieving through charm and modernity what his father had failed to accomplish through assertion and controversy. The turning point came in 2002 when the Italian parliament voted to lift the constitutional ban on male Savoy descendants entering Italy. After 56 years of exile, Vittorio Emanuele was finally free to return to his homeland. The moment should have been triumphant, but it was complicated by ongoing legal troubles and public skepticism about his motives. His first return to Italy in December 2002 was carefully orchestrated. Television crews captured his emotional reaction as he kissed Italian soil at the airport, fulfilling a dream he had held since childhood. Yet the homecoming felt hollow. He returned not as a potential king, but as a curiosity, a relic of a discarded past. In 2003, Vittorio Emanuele visited his father's tomb in the Hautecombe Abbey in France, an emotional pilgrimage that underscored the personal cost of the family's long exile. He also made a significant gesture by publicly apologizing for the 1938 racial laws enacted by his grandfather, King Victor Emmanuel III, during the fascist period. This apology, while late in coming, demonstrated a recognition of the monarchy's historical responsibilities. His later years were marked by continued legal battles, family disputes, and efforts to establish a meaningful role for himself in contemporary Italy. He worked to establish the Royal House of Savoy Foundation and engage in charitable activities, though his controversial past limited his effectiveness. Vittorio Emanuele's health began to decline in the 2010s. He underwent multiple surgeries and struggled with the accumulated stress of decades of legal battles and public controversy. Despite his problems, he continued to assert his position as head of the House of Savoy and maintained hope for some form of restoration. Prince Vittorio Emanuele died on February 3, 2024, in Geneva at the age of 86. His death marked the end of a tumultuous life that had been shaped entirely by the circumstances of exile and the struggle to find purpose after the loss of his destined role. His funeral was held at the Basilica of Superga near Turin, the traditional burial place of the House of Savoy. The service was attended by family members and representatives of various European royal houses, but the Italian government sent only lower-level officials, reflecting the continuing ambivalence about the Savoy legacy. The relationship between Vittorio Emanuele and his father was complicated by expectations, disappointment, and genuine affection. King Umberto II had invested enormous hope in his son, seeing him as the potential restorer of the monarchy. He provided the prince with the best education possible and shared with him the full weight of royal responsibility. But as Vittorio Emanuele's controversies mounted, the relationship became strained. The king disapproved of his son's more reckless decisions and worried that scandal would permanently damage the family's reputation. Yet he never stopped loving his heir or hoping that wisdom would eventually triumph over impulse. When Umberto II died in 1983, he passed to his son not just claims to a non-existent throne, but the burden of representing a dynasty that had ruled Italy for less than a century, but traced its roots back nearly a millennium. Vittorio Emanuele carried this burden for 41 more years, until his own death finally closed the chapter on the direct male line of the Italian royal family. His life demonstrated both the personal cost of political exile and the difficulty of adapting ancient institutions to modern realities. Though his controversies overshadowed his genuine devotion to his family's heritage, Vittorio Emanuele never stopped believing in the value of monarchy or the possibility of restoration. In the end, he was perhaps the last true believer in the divine right of the House of Savoy to rule Italy. Princess Maria Gabriella Elena Giuseppina Margherita was born on February 24, 1940, in Rome, at a moment when Europe was already engulfed in the flames of World War II. Her birth occurred during one of the most turbulent periods in Italian history, as the country aligned itself with Nazi Germany and prepared for a conflict that would ultimately destroy the fascist regime and threaten the monarchy itself. Unlike her older siblings, who had known peacetime royal life, Maria Gabriella's earliest memories were shaped by war. Air raid sirens, blackout curtains, and the constant movement between palaces for security reasons formed the backdrop of her childhood. She was too young to understand the political complexities, but old enough to sense the tension that permeated the royal household. The collapse of fascism in 1943 and Italy's subsequent surrender to the Allies created chaos that directly affected the royal family. Maria Gabriella, only 3 years old, was moved repeatedly between various residences as the family sought safety from both German occupation forces and Italian partisans who viewed the monarchy as complicit in the fascist disaster. When the monarchy fell in 1946, 6-year-old Maria Gabriella found herself in exile, but her youth may have made the transition easier than it was for her older siblings. She had fewer concrete memories of royal grandeur to mourn and could adapt more readily to the reduced circumstances of exile. Maria Gabriella's education took place primarily in Swiss and French schools, where she developed the intellectual curiosity that would define her adult life. Unlike her siblings, who struggled in different ways with the loss of their royal roles, she seemed to find liberation in academic pursuit and cultural exploration. Her facility with languages rivaled that of her sister Maria Pia, but Maria Gabriella was drawn particularly to history and art. She developed an expertise in Renaissance and Baroque art that would later inform her professional activities. Her teachers noted her analytical mind and her ability to synthesize complex historical information. The influence of her mother, Queen Marie José, proved particularly important during these formative years. The Belgian-born queen was herself an intellectual, with interest in history, literature, and the arts. She encouraged Maria Gabriella's academic pursuits and provided the cultural grounding that would serve as foundation for her later career. During her university years, Maria Gabriella studied art history and developed the expertise that would make her a respected voice in European cultural circles. She possessed not just theoretical knowledge, but practical understanding of how royal collections were assembled, maintained, and displayed. Knowledge that proved invaluable as European museums and institutions sought to understand their own royal heritage. In 1969, at age 29, Maria Gabriella married Robert Zellinger de Balcony, a French businessman and art collector. The marriage represented a departure from traditional royal matchmaking. Robert was not of noble birth, though he moved in aristocratic circles and shared Maria Gabriella's passion for art and culture. The wedding was a more modest affair than those typically associated with royal marriages, reflecting both the family's reduced circumstances and Maria Gabriella's personal preference for privacy over pageantry. The ceremony took place in France, where the couple planned to make their home. Their marriage produced one daughter, Marie Elizabeth, born in 1972. Maria Gabriella threw herself into motherhood while continuing her cultural activities. She was determined to provide her daughter with both the stability that political upheaval had denied her own generation and the cultural education that she valued so highly. But the marriage faced challenges that ultimately proved insurmountable. The pressures of maintaining a public profile while building a private life, combined with fundamental differences in temperament and life goals, created tensions that could not be resolved. The couple separated in 1976 and divorced in 1990, following a pattern that seemed to affect many members of her generation of European royalty. Despite the end of her marriage, Maria Gabriella maintained cordial relationships with her ex-husband and ensured that their daughter maintained connections to both sides of her heritage. She had learned from her own experience how important family stability could be during periods of uncertainty. Following her divorce, Maria Gabriella was free to pursue her scholarly interests with greater intensity. She founded the King Umberto II Foundation in Lausanne, Switzerland, an institution dedicated to preserving the historical memory and cultural heritage of the House of Savoy. The foundation became her life's work, serving as both archive and research center for scholars interested in the history of the Italian monarchy. Maria Gabriella oversaw the collection and preservation of documents, photographs, artifacts, and personal items that might otherwise have been lost or scattered. Her work ensured that future historians would have access to primary sources for understanding the Savoy dynasty. Her expertise made her a sought-after author and lecturer. She published several books on Savoy history, including detailed studies of royal jewelry, palace architecture, and court life. These works were notable for their scholarly rigor and insider perspective. She could write about royal protocol and traditions not just from research, but from lived experience. Maria Gabriella also became a regular guest on television programs and documentary projects dealing with European royal history. Her dignified presence and authoritative knowledge made her an ideal representative of her family's heritage. Unlike her brother Vittorio Emanuele, whose public appearances often generated controversy, Maria Gabriella's media presence enhanced her family's reputation. Her work extended beyond mere preservation to active interpretation and contextualization. She understood that royal history could not be separated from broader social and political developments, and her scholarship reflected this sophisticated understanding of historical complexity. In addition to her historical work, Maria Gabriella engaged in various charitable activities, particularly those related to education and cultural preservation. She served on the boards of several European cultural institutions and advised museums on matters related to royal collections. Her dedication to scholarship and public service earned recognition from academic institutions and cultural organizations across Europe. She received honorary degrees and awards for her contributions to historical understanding and cultural preservation. These honors were particularly meaningful because they were earned through merit rather than inherited through birth. Maria Gabriella also played an important role in the gradual reconciliation between the House of Savoy and the Italian Republic. Her scholarly approach to family history, which acknowledged both achievements and failures, helped create a more nuanced understanding of the monarchy's role in Italian history. She avoided the political rhetoric that complicated her brother's relationship with Italy, focusing instead on cultural and historical contributions. Among all his children, Maria Gabriella perhaps developed the deepest intellectual connection with her father. King Umberto II was himself a man of culture and learning, with interest in history and the arts that complemented his royal duties. He recognized in his daughter a kindred spirit and encouraged her scholarly pursuits. During his long exile, the king found comfort in Maria Gabriella's company and counsel. She possessed both the emotional intelligence to understand his grief at the loss of his throne and the intellectual capacity to engage with his ideas about history, politics, and culture. Their conversations helped sustain him through the loneliest periods of his exile. When Umberto II died in 1983, Maria Gabriella took responsibility for organizing the preservation of his papers and personal effects. She ensured that his correspondence, writings, and other documents were properly archived and made available to researchers. This work became the foundation for the more comprehensive preservation efforts she would later undertake through her foundation. Maria Gabriella understood that her father's legacy extended beyond his brief reign as king. She worked to present him as a complete historical figure, a man of culture and principle who had been shaped by extraordinary circumstances beyond his control. Through her efforts, historians gained access to a more complete picture of both the man and the monarch. In her later years, Maria Gabriella continued her scholarly and cultural activities while enjoying a more private family life. She maintained close relationships with her daughter and grandchildren, ensuring that knowledge of their heritage was passed to the next generation without the burden of political expectation. Her foundation remained active, continuing to collect materials and support research into Savoy history. She also worked to digitize the collection, making it more accessible to international scholars and ensuring its preservation for future generations. Maria Gabriella represented a different model of royal identity than her siblings. While Vittorio Emanuele fought for political restoration and Maria Pia maintained traditional aristocratic connections, Maria Gabriella found purpose in intellectual preservation and cultural contribution. Her life demonstrated that royal heritage could be transformed into scholarly authority and public service. Princess Maria Gabriella died on October 9, 2017, in Geneva at the age of 77. Her death marked the end of a life dedicated to ensuring that the complex history of the House of Savoy would be preserved and understood by future generations. Through her scholarship and foundation work, she had transformed personal loss into public service, creating a lasting legacy that transcended the political circumstances of her birth. Princess Maria Beatrice Margherita Giuseppina was born on June 2, 1943, in Naples, the youngest child of the future King Umberto II and Queen Marie José. Her birth occurred during one of the darkest periods of World War II, just months before the collapse of Mussolini's government and Italy's surrender to the Allied forces. From her earliest moments, her life was marked by instability and uncertainty. Known affectionately within the family as Titi, Maria Beatrice was barely 3 years old when the monarchy fell and the family departed for exile. Her youth meant that she had virtually no memories of royal life in Italy. Unlike her older siblings, she would grow up knowing palace life only through stories and photographs. Her childhood was divided between Switzerland, where she attended school with her siblings, and Portugal, where her father established his court in exile. The constant movement between residences and countries became normal for her, creating a cosmopolitan worldview, but also a certain rootlessness that would characterize her adult life. The restrictions that kept male Savoy descendants out of Italy did not apply to the women of the family, but Maria Beatrice rarely took advantage of this freedom during her youth. Italy was the country that had rejected her family, and she felt little connection to a homeland she could barely remember. Maria Beatrice received the same comprehensive education as her siblings, becoming fluent in multiple languages and developing the cultural sophistication expected of European royalty. However, her temperament was different from her more academically inclined sister Maria Gabriella or her protocol-conscious sister Maria Pia. She was drawn to practical matters and social work rather than scholarly pursuits or court life. During her teenage years, she showed interest in healthcare and social service, suggesting a desire to use her privileged position for concrete good rather than ceremonial purposes. Her coming of age in the 1960s coincided with massive social changes across Europe and the Americas. The countercultural movements, civil rights activism, and changing attitudes toward traditional authority structures influenced her worldview in ways that might have been impossible for earlier generations of royalty. Unlike her siblings, who maintained closer ties to European aristocratic circles, Maria Beatrice seemed more comfortable in international, cosmopolitan environments. Her outlook was shaped less by nostalgia for a lost royal past than by engagement with contemporary social issues and global perspectives. In 1970, at age 27, Maria Beatrice married Luis Rafael Reina Corvalán y Dillon, a Mexican aristocrat whose family had its own complex history of political upheaval and social change. The marriage represented not just a personal choice, but a geographic and cultural departure from her European roots. The wedding was a private affair, reflecting both Maria Beatrice's preference for privacy and the practical considerations of a family still navigating the complexities of exile. The ceremony was held in Switzerland, but the couple planned to establish their life primarily in Mexico, far from the traditional centers of European royal society. Their marriage produced 3 children: Rafael, born in 1971, Patrizio, born in 1973, and Isaiah, born in 1975. Maria Beatrice embraced motherhood with the same practical approach she brought to other aspects of her life, determined to raise her children with both awareness of their heritage and preparation for modern reality. The family life she created in Mexico represented a successful adaptation to exile. Rather than clinging to European aristocratic traditions, she integrated into Mexican high society while maintaining her royal identity. Her children grew up bilingual and bicultural, comfortable in both Latin American and European contexts. For nearly 3 decades, the marriage provided stability and purpose. Maria Beatrice engaged in charitable work, particularly in areas related to education and healthcare. She used her social position to support various philanthropic causes while maintaining a relatively low public profile compared to her siblings. The 1990s brought a series of devastating personal tragedies that tested Maria Beatrice's resilience. In 1994, her eldest son Raphael died in Boston at the age of 23. The loss of a child is perhaps the most profound grief any parent can experience, and for Maria Beatrice, Raphael's death created a wound that never fully healed. The family was still recovering from this loss when another tragedy struck. In 1999, Luis Rafael Reina Corvalán y Dillon was murdered in Cuernavaca, Mexico, in circumstances that shocked both Mexican society and international royal circles. The violent death of her ex-husband, they had divorced in 1998, added another layer of trauma to an already difficult period. These tragedies might have broken a less resilient person, but Maria Beatrice demonstrated the stoicism that had sustained the House of Savoy through centuries of political upheaval. She focused on her surviving children and continued her charitable work, finding purpose in helping others even as she struggled with her own grief. The experience of such profound loss seemed to deepen her commitment to privacy and family life. While her siblings maintained varying degrees of public profile, Maria Beatrice withdrew further from media attention, preferring to process her grief away from public scrutiny. Following the tragedies of the 1990s, Maria Beatrice divided her time between Mexico and Europe, maintaining connections to both worlds while fully belonging to neither. In Mexico, she was known as a member of high society with European royal connections. In Europe, she was the Savoy princess who had chosen exile within exile, building a life far from traditional royal circles. This dual existence reflected the broader challenge facing exiled royalty: how to maintain identity and purpose when removed from the context that originally defined both. Maria Beatrice's solution was to embrace a more private form of royal identity, one based on personal service rather than public ceremony. Her charitable work in Mexico focused particularly on education and healthcare initiatives in underserved communities. She used her social connections and organizational skills to support various projects, working behind the scenes rather than seeking public recognition for her efforts. In Europe, she maintained family connections and participated in important family events, but always with an awareness that her primary life was elsewhere. She represented a different model of royal adaptation, one that embraced geographic and cultural change, rather than clinging to traditional European aristocratic patterns. As she entered her later years, Maria Beatrice continued to divide her time between Mexico and Europe, remaining close to her surviving children and grandchildren. Her life had been marked by both privilege and profound loss, creating a perspective that valued family above all other considerations. She maintained discreet connections to royal and aristocratic circles, but never sought the public role that some of her relatives embraced. Her approach to royal identity was personal rather than political, focused on family relationships and private service rather than public representation. Her surviving children, Patricio and Azaya, grew up with a sophisticated understanding of their complex heritage. They inherited not just royal bloodlines, but also the resilience and adaptability that had enabled their mother to survive exile, tragedy, and cultural displacement. As the youngest child, Maria Beatrice held a special place in her father's affections. King Umberto II cherished his little Titi and took particular pleasure in her visits during his exile. Their relationship was perhaps less complicated than his relationships with his other children because she made no political claims and sought no public role. The king appreciated his youngest daughter's independence and resilience, even as he worried about her geographic distance from the family. Her choice to build a life in Latin America represented both adventure and abandonment from his perspective. He was proud of her adaptability, but saddened by the practical reality of separation. When Umberto II died in 1983, Maria Beatrice was among the family members who gathered for his funeral. Her grief was private and profound, reflecting the loss not just of a father, but of the family anchor who had held the scattered Savoy descendants together through decades of exile. Maria Beatrice continues to live quietly, dividing her time between her adopted Mexico and her European heritage. Now in her 80s, she represents the last direct link to the childhood experience of exile that shaped all of Umberto II's children. Her life demonstrates that royal identity can survive even the most dramatic geographic and cultural displacement. Through personal resilience, family devotion, and quiet service, she has maintained her dignity and purpose while adapting to circumstances that would have been unimaginable to earlier generations of European royalty. Princess Maria Beatrice embodies the private side of royal exile, the personal cost of political upheaval and the individual strength required to build meaning from loss. Her story completes the picture of how Umberto II's children responded to their shared circumstances, each finding their own path through the complexities of life without a throne. 4 children, one shared fate. Born to rule, raised in exile, forced to invent lives that previous generations could never have imagined. Maria Pia maintained the dignified traditions of European aristocracy, preserving protocol while adapting to changed circumstances. Vittorio Emanuele fought for restoration that never came, carrying the burden of a crown that existed only in memory. Maria Gabriella transformed loss into scholarship, ensuring that the history of her dynasty would survive even if its political power could not. And Maria Beatrice built a quiet life far from the spotlight, demonstrating that royal identity could flourish even in the most unexpected places. Together, they embody different responses to the same fundamental challenge: how to find purpose when the role you were born for has been abolished by history. Their stories reveal that dignity, service, and love can transcend political circumstances. The House of Savoy lost its throne in 1946, but through the lives of Umberto II's children, it discovered something perhaps more enduring: the ability to adapt, preserve, and continue.